Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the BPCA webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about practical flea control. Great to see. We've got 120 participants that have joined us today, so really great to see. If the weather is anything like it is here right now, you'll be hunkered down in your van or in your office somewhere. But just a bit of housekeeping before we start. CPD points. So it's one CPD point today for both the basis prompt scheme as well as the BPCA registered. So make sure if you register today the proper way, of course, which you have, it'll be automatically updated to BPCA registered as well as the prompt. This video, just in case you've got any colleagues or friends that might want to watch this afterwards, or if you need to shoot off for whatever reason and you miss it, you can view it on our website. We'll give about 24 hours and you'll be able to see it on there. Just in case you need to go, just registering the point, you maybe need to get in contact with the office to make sure that's done. Just a few reminders about questions. The aim of today is what I would love, obviously we're talking about flea control, but I really want you to be involved with it as well and ask questions, because that's going to be the most helpful to you. I'm going to cover various bits and pieces, but I may not go into the detail you want, or you might have a particular question about something you're struggling with at the minute. Please put them out there right from this minute now until the end. Put the questions up. I'll be able to see them. I'm going to stop twice, so once in the middle for questions, and also at the end we'll do some as well. So if there's a lot of them, I might struggle to get through all of them. We've got a maximum of an hour today, and time does go quickly when we get a lot of questions, but I want to encourage them. Anything I struggle with, I'll give you my contact details at the end, and you can just give me an email or a phone call, and we can chat about it there. But I will try to answer all the questions, I promise. I can't see you or hear you, so just a quick reminder, if you're shouting anything at me, I can't hear you. Type it down, and I certainly will be able to. So yeah, as I said, the aim of today, we're going to do a bit of biology for fleas, just a little bit. You know, this is more for update rather than a detailed entomological look at fleas. It's just a real quick update, a few reminders. It might encourage you to have some questions about it as well, which would be good. Some more questions in the middle, and then after that we'll talk about the practical implementation of flea control, because I think that's going to be the most useful element to you. That's what I think you want to know anyway, is when you get that call, what is it you can practically do? What legislatively, what can you do? So again, I will cover that. Anything that you think, oh, you got some questions, again, keep encouraging you to get those questions up there. It gets things moving. And if I say anything that anybody, you feel that you want some more detail on, again, ask. We need that. At the end, we've got some feedback. So we need some feedback from today just to make sure that the content was good for you, but also the recommendations for other topics that you would like to cover. Okay, so that's all the housekeeping. What we'll do is we'll get the presentation up now and we'll get going. Okay, so professional flea control. As I said before, what we're going to cover today, and what I've anticipated as you, the viewers, would like to most know about, is a bit of biology and behaviour. So we'll probably only spend 10 minutes on this, just to bit of a highlight, a reminder of the important facts about the biology and behaviour. And then also, so this, when the phone rings, that's about when you get these phone calls, how do you deal with it? And it makes sense what that means as we go on. I think it's really important we talk about it. Break for questions. A bit of talk about infestation status. Again, that will make more sense as we go along, but it's generally around, okay, if you can confirm an infestation or if you can't, really important. And then safe treatment approach. And then we'll end with some questions as well. So hopefully we'll get them popping up. Got one already, which I won't do it yet. We'll do it at the questions when they pop up in a few slides time. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing today. So Teniocephalides then, Felis, the cat flea. I believe I say that right. I've said that all the time. If anybody else feels that it's said a different way, you won't be able to tell me because I can't hear you. But yes, so Teniocephalides, the scientific name for a cat flea. We also have a dog flea, as we know, but the cat flea is certainly the most common parasitic pest that we have. We would have all come across them, be it in your line of work or be it actually in your own personal lives as well. It's something we call an ectoparasite, so they feed from the external of a body, of an animal's body, compared to the endoparasites, like parasitic worms and things like that we get within our bodies. So an ectoparasite. I'll go through this image that you can see on there. I'm sure some of you already had a quick look, but really important to know this cycle. Now, with all pest control, whether we're talking about insects or rodents, to know your pest is not only going to give you the knowledge to be able to address an infestation in a successful and effective way, because you know what they're doing and when they're doing it and when they're laying their eggs, but also your customer will have more faith. They'll have that trust in you that you've got that knowledge about the pests' biology and behavior and life cycles, and you're talking to them about it. They're going to get some real value from that and real trust and confidence that you're going to do a good job, of which I know you all will, of course. But this really does help your customers understand that you know what you're doing. So just to, so I'm sure you've all had a look at it, but just to go through it briefly, viable eggs. So that viable eggs is important because the adult flea will only lay viable eggs after a feed. Every time they feed, they can lay an egg. And also they need to have a feed from a host. So they need those, if it's a cat flea, they need to feed from, obviously, its host animal, a cat, and then they'll be able to produce the proper enzymes to get viable eggs. If they don't have that, eggs will still be laid, but they won't be viable, so they won't hatch. I had a really good question, actually, the other day come through on an email, which I thought I'd share today about eggs and cat fleas. If a cat flea was to be obviously hosting on a cat in a rented property, and that person was to move out and take that cat with them, but there were some eggs or pupae or adults hanging around, and then a new tenant comes in with a dog, is that dog a true host? Are them fleas going to be able to feed from that host, being a dog, not a cat, and produce viable eggs? And from my knowledge, from all the books that we can read on them, yes, it would, because the cat flea is also commonly found on dogs. It's not just cats, even though it is called that. We do have a dog flea as well, but cat fleas will feed and produce viable eggs from both the cat and the dog, so that can happen. But certainly not humans. If they're feeding from our blood, they can't produce that viable egg. They do about 30 to 50 a day, so it really depends, like with everything on insects, is the environmental conditions, the temperatures, but they will around 30 to 50 eggs per day, and it's pretty constant. The female will be laying probably about one every hour, and in her lifetime, depending on the amount of days that she lives, from 2 to 25, she can get up to 2 to 5,000-6,000 eggs. However, some research was done, and it's quite common to know that actually they might only lay 100 eggs in their lifetime, because it might only be a couple of days that they're surviving for. They might be groomed up, so that animal that they're infesting, through the grooming process, a lot of the time they will actually consume the adult fleas, and therefore obviously stop that production of eggs, because that flea is no longer. So there is a real variable number in terms of how many eggs they can lay in their lifetime. It just really depends how long the female lives for. So yes, this egg will hatch out again after a period of say it's about 7 to 10 days. They will into a larvae. Of course, it's a complete metamorphosis. So you've got the egg, larvae, pupae, and adult. About 3 molts this will go through. The larvae actually feed on things like dust and human skin that flake off, but also from the host animal itself. That blood from the flea droppings as well, the skin that comes from the host animal, as well as adults, human beings. They'll feed from that dust and that dead skin that comes off, as well as the droppings from the adult flea. So important they've got that. So thinking about that, hygiene and hoovering and cleaning and things like that can really help. Yes, it's not a way to completely get rid of an infestation, but it really helps to control that cycle, that larvae stage, and it just gives them that little less opportunity. As I said, that will go through about 3 molts, depending on environmental conditions in terms of how long it might take. But they'll then pupate, as with most insects with complete metamorphosis. But the difference with this, of course, is that this pupae, the adult within the pupae, once it's developed, can stay in that cocoon for up to a year. Some say 2 years, but debatable. Let's say 18 months to go in the middle. And once they do emerge, it's only on, for example, an external stimulation. So if there is a vibration in the area, someone walking around, it might be a CO2 emission as well from a host they might detect, similar to what bed bugs do. And then they will, they'll say hatch or emerge from that pupation and jump straight onto the host, because as soon as they have left that pupate, they need to have a feed. So that's why they stay within that cocoon until they hear or feel a host nearby, because they need that meal straight after emerging from the pupae. As I mentioned before, females can live 2 to 25 days. It really depends on the environment and whether they get hoovered up by the host animal or vacuumed up by us humans. Okay, so yeah, a bit of if we have any more questions on that life cycle, then please do ask. But I think they're the most important things. There's a note at the top there, the cycle can be 2 to 8 months. It really is a vast expanse of difference, really depending on, but because they're normally within a home environment, temperatures can be pretty ambient. So I would say you're pretty confident that most cycles will probably go through within 4 weeks, as long as there's somebody living there. Okay. So just a little bit about the cat flea itself. As I said, Tenissophiles felis. The dog flea is the Tenissophiles canis. It's just the difference in dog and cat flea. But certainly the cat flea is the most common in the UK. It will spend pretty much all of, if not certainly a lot of their time off of the host, usually in around bedding areas, sort of resting also, and that's where we can pick them up sometimes, or other animals pick them up out in the environment. If they're passing somewhere that, say, for instance, a fox den that might have some fleas, or a neighbour or a friend that's got an animal with fleas, those ones that are residing in and around the pet bed area will then obviously jump onto any host that comes within distance, instead if you happen to take that back yourselves. I mentioned before, the larvae feed on the dust and debris, adult droppings and flakes of human skin, as well as the dog or the cat's flaking skin, and the blood residues that come from the feeding from their skin. Eggs mostly fall off the host onto the bed and carpet, like I mentioned. We're all very familiar with that. Part of the recommendation to customers is obviously this hygiene and vacuuming and making sure that those sorts of things are done before we get out there. And mentioned before, I've covered a few of these things already, but just as an update, adult flea requires a blood from the true host to lay those viable eggs. And I put at the bottom there, why is this important? Again, we covered it there, but it's really important because, for example, if you have a tenanted property that has animals within it and they've had a flea infestation, and they were to move from that property and vacate it completely, you'll still have those eggs and the pupae remaining, and adults as well. If a new family was to move in but they had no animals of any description, cat or dog, then those adult fleas, actually, yes, they will bite those humans, but they won't produce those viable eggs. They don't have the correct enzymes to be able to do that. So they can still last for some time. It will depend on how many eggs and how many pupae are there. The adults themselves, like we've seen before, they will live for 2 to 25 days. So you could probably say within a month, those adult fleas would probably have succumbed. They would have died. However, if you've got these eggs and pupae hanging around, and depending on how many, it might just be a few. There might have been a really big infestation, and there might be, possibly dozens or hundreds of eggs or pupae in cracks and crevices. And that's where the time difference can vary. So, you might say, well, it shouldn't last too long, the infestation, because they can't lay viable eggs and they won't increase in numbers. But those eggs and pupae, obviously, they're hanging around. They don't need that blood meal yet. They will still hatch. They will still, as long as that flea larvae has got to a stage in its cycle and it's molted just enough before that host animal has gone, all that, because it's already got that debris obviously that's feeding on, and there'll still be some blood particles and skin hanging around for it to feed on, so they'll still be growing, and the pupae as well, they're just waiting for the host. So depending on how many of those stages of the life cycle are present will depend on how long a problem may last for in a house where there's no host animal. Get a lot of those questions, a lot of problems where things have gone on for maybe a month or 2 or 3. And it can take a bit of time sometimes to get rid of a problem. But again, we can go into that a bit more. If anybody wants to talk about how you have your own specific problems, it's probably a telephone conversation. So yes, really important, that bit. Okay, so when the phone rings, so this is, we're done with the biology section for the moment. I've got a few questions popped up that are possibly relating to that. I'll have a look in a minute. But just before we do go on to questions, I think it's really important to address when the phone rings and someone calls you and says, I've got fleas, I need you to get here and treat them for me. Is it a simple, okay, no worries, I'll be there in 5 minutes and off you go? It shouldn't be, really. For your benefit and the customer's benefit in terms of managing their expectation, there should be a bit more to that conversation, that initial phone call that you have, because they will normally say, can you spray and how much? But really, you should be asking, have they seen the fleas themselves? Do they have a photograph maybe? They might have caught one in a little jar on some sellotape or something like that. And if they say, well, yes, I have seen the fleas and, oh, here's a photograph I can pop over to you on text, and you can confirm that, actually, yeah, it looks like they've got a flea infestation here, then great, you can get the appointment booked in and off you go and be quite confident that's what you're walking into. However, but when it's only suspected, when they say, well, I've had a few bites, I've got some on my arms or my legs, and I do have a dog, or my friend down the road's got a cat and I think they might have fleas and I've brought them back, and it's all a bit speculative. I think you then need to consider what your process is over the phone, and explain the process to them, because you've got to manage your customer's expectation. Really important. So yeah, hang on, what is the process? Going into questions after, I've got a couple of slides and then we'll be going on to some questions. So this is what I recommend as the process of establishing, I call it. I would do this for any pest species, be it rodent or insect. When you get that call, it's going to benefit you and it's going to benefit the customer to establish what the problem is as much as possible on the phone. You need a site survey, of course, a lot of the time, but trying to establish it on the phone. So what do you ask them? Ask them what exactly have they experienced. They're usually quite descriptive, aren't they? And you can build a picture from these questions. With your skills, with your experience and your training, you can build a picture and make a decision on, well, actually, I think we might need to do something a bit different here. But ask them exactly what they experience. When did the bites first start? They might say, well, I've just moved into a property recently and I've just started noticing it. That's a bit of a clue, isn't it, that there might be an underlying problem with that property. It might be that they've recently got a rescue animal. They've had it for a few months, but maybe they're not treating it, or they've noticed some biting. Again, these things can build that picture for you. It might also just be, well, I haven't really changed anything. I haven't seen much, but I'm just itching a lot, or I've noticed some bites on me. All these things build a picture for you. I will go into the answer to these things, of course, in a moment. But these are just the things that the process of establishing, asking if they do have pets and whether you're a new tenant in a rented property or even an owned property that you've recently bought. Again, the previous occupants could have had pets. That's another question with precautionary treatments, which I'll come on to. I'll mention briefly at the end, and we'll discuss a little bit. So yes, these questions do form a picture, but regardless of the responses, the following expectation should be managed. Really important. So following expectation. I love that's my favourite phrase, is managing expectation. If you do that, you're very unlikely to get an unhappy customer. Managing expectations. So make your customer aware of this. You cannot use chemicals if there is no confirmed infestation. If you think there might be fleas, not sure, I'll give it a spray anyway. Cannot do that. We cannot do precautionary pesticide applications. We're talking about insecticides here, so we'll keep it to that. Cannot do precautionary insecticide treatments. COSH, so control of substances hazardous to health, the control of pesticide regulations, which a lot of insecticides are still governed within or authorised by, the BPR, which has taken over a lot of that, biocidal product regulations, and also the Health and Safety at Work Act, because you're the technicians out there, whether you're the technician or you have technicians, if you're using a chemical just in case, that's not Health and Safety at Work Act. That's not COSH. Shouldn't be doing that. We should be finding other ways or monitoring. So that's the key to this, is that on the left-hand side here of the screen, have you found an ID sample? If you have, brilliant, proceed with the flea treatment. If you haven't, then monitoring. This is not going to lose you any work. This is not someone going to put the phone down and you say, well, if you're not going to spray, I'm not going to employ you. You don't just say, if I can't spray, I can't do anything for you. You say to them, look, I can monitor. We're not sure whether there's any insects here. I can't find any. And under legislation and professional practices, I can't treat. So therefore, but we can monitor, and that will give them the confidence that there are no biting insects there, or if there are, you obviously can find them and deal with them. But it's a service. It's still a service. Just because you're not putting chemical down doesn't mean that you're not providing a service. So you can monitor, 7 days, 5 days, 10 days, depending on, the non-toxic traps. There's various different ones, I think, but some mostly produced around heat to draw them in a sticky pad. You can leave it with the customer. They can check on it. You don't have to do multiple visits. Normally arrange to come back within a certain period of time to take them away if there have been no catches. It's still a service. If you do that monitoring and you have found an ID sample, there's no arrow to introduce that. I think I've got to put it on there. But proceed with the flea treatment if you do find a sample. If you don't, you do not treat. As I said, it could be seen as against the law. Certainly professional practice. If you're a BPCA member, we have a code of best practice for precautionary insecticide use, being that you don't do precautionary insecticide treatments. As I say, we've got a code of practice on it, available to everyone to have a look. Doing a few updates on it, but it's all pretty much the same. The law's the same. You can have a look at that. So that's the managing expectations and what I recommend. Okay, and just a quick one here. What about non-toxic controls? So, monitoring, not really a control, obviously, but, it might lead on to discovering whether there's a problem. You might think, well, what about things like diatomaceous earth, silica dust, or something that is of, non-chemical or pesticide? And maybe you could, maybe it's something to consider if you haven't found any evidence, but you feel you want to provide a service to a customer. You think, I can do non-toxic. That's maybe not against legislation. But actually, if you look at some of these products, they do still have authorizations associated with them. They do still have manufacturers' safety data sheets, and there can still be problems associated with those non-toxic products. So just make sure, happy, if there is something that you feel is non-toxic, and you might be said diatomaceous earth in cracks or crevices, then again, legislatively nothing to stop you, but I would say professionally and in terms of practices, the monitoring way is always the way. And then once you've confirmed it, then consider your non-toxic controls, your diatomaceous earth, your low toxicity measures. I'm going to talk about that a bit more as we go on. Right, I've got some questions. I have 7 of them, I think. So let's go through. So Martin, my flea calls, all domestic, have risen 40% from last year. Wow, okay, that's a brilliant fact. Actually, I might have to keep that one for the records. We do get media getting in touch with us sometimes. They're always interested if pest species have suddenly exploded and become a massive problem. So quite interesting, 40%. But I don't know, Martin, whether you can answer it, but is that possible? Were they all flea problems, or was it just they thought they were fleas and maybe it was something else within the environment? Interesting. But thank you for that one. Roger, so will a flea lay viable eggs if it feeds solely on a human host? No. You do get human fleas, they're very rare. I say I've never come across one. I might have done in the early days and not knowing it. But human fleas, yes, certainly. But we're talking about the cat flea here, and no, they will not lay viable eggs with human blood only. So Lee, how is it possible to treat a flea infestation with 1 or 2 sprays in a couple of weeks when there is such a long life cycle? Well, this is it, Lee. This is where it all comes down to processes. I'm going to go into that a little bit more as we go on, and managing your customers' expectations. And actually, 1 or 2 sprays might not be suitable. Each company, each person approaches pest control is not, there's not one way to everything, especially when it comes to fleas. We all have our different processes and approaches. As long as they're legally and professionally viable, then great. But I agree with you. You know, 1 spray, absolutely not. You know, for a flea infestation, for me, I don't think I had ever done a flea treatment job in 1 spray. I just haven't, because actually need that follow up just to make sure the problem is gone. You can get, I think you can get some resistant in fleas. I'm not really up to date with flea resistance. Certainly, you know, bed bug resistance we all know of, and we are, but there could be some. So it's always best to do at least 2 visits. But also, if you're using a product that's got a residual life, Lee, it will. That residuality will lay there, and if you've got a nice environment, I would say within a month that cycle is a good chance would have gone through. So if you say two visits in 1 month, that might catch them all. But yeah, 3 visits is the norm for me and for a lot of other people I talk to. But don't take that as anybody who's not doing 3 visits. We're shouting and saying you can't do that. We'll go on to that in a bit, but it is more the norm. So another question. So humans are not hosts for the cat fleas, correct? Yes. They will feed from humans, so don't get me wrong with this. The fleas will bite humans, but they will not produce viable eggs. The adult flea will die naturally within sort of, you know, well, depending on whether we vacuum it up or it just dies of natural causes, but usually within the month it'll die. Once that flea's died, obviously they're not there to lay those eggs anymore. But the eggs or pupae that are hanging around, they will obviously hatch, do their thing, and it will seem like you've got another reoccurrence. And oh, maybe these fleas are producing viable eggs from humans' blood. They're really not. It just might be that residual, those residual eggs or pupae that were hanging around from the previous infestation. So no, they won't. How do you differentiate between a flea and a bedbug bite? Amazing question. The media like asking this one. For me, I don't differentiate it. I think mosquitoes, they say bites can have more of a white head to it, whereas bedbugs and fleas don't. But I'm still not confident with that. I would never say to anybody, send me some photos of your bites and I'll better tell you what they are. I just won't, and I don't think any medical practitioner could either. The best way is always to say, ask where are the bites, you know, lower legs. If they're sort of more upper body or on the ends of the arms, probably more bed bugs. Whereas if they're lower legs, then yes, they could be fleas or cable bug, static electricity. It's another subject. So no, I would say don't tell a customer you can differentiate between the 2 bites. Can you treat if the client shows clear bites on their body? Yeah, great question. That's the thing why it's good to cover this, is that no, for me, because again, I'm going to cover this in a little bit, but you don't know where they've got that bite from. When any insect, whether it's a mosquito or you know, like an ectoparasite bites you, I might react within an hour, whereas somebody else may take 24 hours to react to it, or even a bit longer. So if this particular customer has been bitten at a friend's house, or they've been on a tube or a train and got bitten by a bed bug, or they've been out in the environment and they've gotten bitten by a mosquito, it could be anything really, but just because they happen to have noticed it when they've got to work the next day or when they've got home and they've started scratching, and that's when they instantly look around their environment and go, oh, it must be here where the problem is. That's not always the case. So yeah, bites on the body is not an indication to an infestation. It could be a skin condition as well. So I'd say no. Got 3 more questions, just shoot through them. So does the pet having fleas confirmed by vet equals evidence? Oh, it's from Anonymous. That's a good question. I think that will come down to your own personal situation and judgment of situation. If you're in a property, for me, no, I wouldn't. That wouldn't be enough for me for a customer to say, "Oh, my vet has said, yeah, my cat's or dog's got fleas," because they might be pulling the wool over your eyes. You might have told them the process and said to them, "Look, I'm not going to use chemicals unless we've got them confirmed." And that customer might go, "Oh yeah, well actually my vet said that, you know, my cat or dog's got fleas. Are you going to treat now?" I'm not pessimistic or anything, but I don't like the customer to dictate whether I'm going to do something or not, or use a chemical. You know, I know we need to keep our customers happy and give them what they need, but when we're using chemicals and we're being professionals, we need to make the decisions. So no, for me, I would say the vet saying that they've got fleas is not a good reason to treat a property, because those fleas might have only just appeared. There might not be much of a problem in the environment. You know, you really don't know. I think monitoring, you would say, okay, your vet said your animal's got fleas. Let's monitor around, you know, and the vet's obviously going to be doing the treatment for the animal to rid them of that problem. You can then do some monitoring around this customer's house and say, let's see if you've got some. My recommendation for that. How does precautionary sprays work with a letting agent when it's fleas? Yes, so I'm going to answer that one at the end, if you don't mind, Christopher, because that is a very big subject and a very one close to my heart and I'm very passionate about. And I always try to educate landlords where possible. We've tried codes of practice for it. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to come to that one at the end, Christopher, if you don't mind. I just want to make sure I give it the time it's needed, and I don't want to run out here. So I've got quite a few more that's come through. I'm going to have to just leave them for now because there are a lot. Thank you. As I said, I do really appreciate that. But yeah, I've been going half an hour. I've been babbling half an hour already. So let's get on with it, and hopefully I can get to these questions. Okay. So need a little drink of water. So, okay, I mean, some of this, what we go through now, might answer some of these questions that have popped up. I haven't read through them all, but we'll see if we can get there. So, arrive on site, the process to consider. Again, I'm just kind of really going over what we've discussed anyway. You know, you should be asking yourself, right, what should the inspection entail? Can we ID fleas from just a bite? Now, again, everyone has their different methods, but if I went to, say, an office block, and they said, you know, there's a couple of people in that corner over there that's, you know, said they've had some bites, and, you know, it's lower leg. I think, okay, you know, a commercial or somewhere where there's lots of electrical wires and computers, could be cable bugs. So I'd normally get on my hands and knees, and I'd sort of, you know, check the carpet. I'd have a white overall suit on as well, so that if I could see anything jumping on or near me. I'd also sort of, you know, use sort of sticky pads sometimes. I'd sort of go over the carpets and in the corners just to see if I picked anything up. That was my real basic kind of, yeah, get down and dirty looking at it. And if I can't find anything after that, then that's when these monitoring stations come into play. Because obviously I want to try and find them as soon as I got there, because it's better for the customer and better for me. But if that process of looking and searching, I can't find any, and they can't produce any IDs or specimens, then I'm going to be monitoring. That's how I do it. So again, if you've got no signs, what you need to do is, as we've just discussed before, you need to monitor for it. So what about if you do find some signs of an infestation then? This part of the webinar is pretty much a static part for me for most webinars that we do, because when it comes to treatment for any pest, all of these things are important. You know, the safety of technician, customer, your product selection. It's always a big challenge, that, because there's so many of them now and there's so many changes. So product selection is really important. And then post-treatment as well. All these things you've got to consider. Risk assessments, cost assessments, that's we have done a webinar previously on risk assessment, so I'm not going to go into those now. You can go back to that webinar on our website if you want to have a look at it and just have a specific bit of training on that. I'm not going to go into massive details here, but just as a quick overview, like I mentioned there, the technician, you need to make sure proper training, proper knowledge. On the pest, like I mentioned before, it's important they've got this knowledge of the pest and the available treatments. They've got, you've kitted them out. If you're a technician that, you're comfortable and you're sure you're kitted out with all the right PPE and RPE, that you know how to maintain these things, maintaining your respiratory protective equipment. There's no point having one that's not functional or safe. Method statements, access equipment, health questionnaires. There's all these things you've got to think about when using chemicals. And obviously, customer, this is where the risk assessing comes into it. You need to know their vulnerabilities. I had something, I'm not sure if the member is on today, but I had a chat with a member the other day who had a customer, a pregnant lady, and she was asking all sorts of questions about the chemicals and whether they're safe. And really the conversation came down to, look, if you can look at a chemical, you can look at its safety data sheet, you can look at its label, provide all that information to the customer, discuss it. And if they're still not sure or not happy and they're asking for you to make that decision, for me, that particular member walked away from the work. And I think this lady actually employed heat treatment, a non-chemical process. But for you to medically make a decision on whether it's diatomaceous earth or whether it's FICAM, for you to make that decision on whether it's safe to use within an environment with not just pregnant ladies, but people have allergies, things like that. You're not trained to make those decisions. You can only follow the documentation and the products you've got and the training. But if you're not confident with that decision with the customer and their vulnerabilities they're telling you about, then you need to consider either other ways or provide them with the information and let them make the decision. And again, product selection, think COSH. So you've got to think about, could you do something without using a chemical? This is where the monitoring comes in. If you're not sure if there's a problem or not, when you do find an infestation, you give all of the, vacuuming advice and sort of post-care as well, trying to remove those eggs as much as possible. And then you 9 times out of 10 will go in with a chemical, a pesticide, but make sure that's the lowest or highest LD50 possible, the lowest toxicity, and work up from that hierarchy of controls. It goes for COSH or health and safety risk assessing. If you can eliminate the hazard completely, i.e. don't use a chemical, that's the best way. But if not, substitution, something less hazard, and then also engineering controls. So things like your sprayers that you're using, they take you away from that product as well. That's the engineering control. And PPE should always be the last option. Invariably for the user of these pesticides, we're always going to use that PPE. But if we can and use less toxic things where we don't need to, that's always preferable. And then post-treatment, so barriers, clean up and advice to your customers. Make sure you're clear with the advice, verbally, tell them verbally, one of the best ways, but also write it down. You need to make sure all the advice you're giving them and all the things that you're doing, that you're not just telling them verbally, but you're writing it down and you're having that signature and counter signature on treatment reports. Because if anything was to go wrong or any questions were asked, you've got that information there and say, look, I'd done these things that I've said I've done. I gave this advice and it was ignored, for example. So record it. But yes, all these things, safety for all is always important, of course. Okay, so product and labels. I don't know what your expectation is on whether I was going to sit here and say, oh, this product and that product's the best one. I think you should use this formulation. I'm not going to. BPCA, we can't and we don't, and they're changing so often. We don't use these products as much. You do. You know what these products are, so you make the selection. But just make sure that read the label. This is more true now than it has ever been, that reading the label is vital. It's always been a legal requirement, of course it has, and professionalism, but because of so many changes happening, and there are more changes, we're being told, insecticides, rodenticides, pesticides generally, for whatever reason, a variable amount of reasons, not just the one we're all thinking, Brexit, but many other reasons to do with manufacturing, they will change. Their instructions change. The pests that you can treat with them might change. Formulations might change. Read the label. You can get CBD points for it as well. So if you make it a little toolbox talk with yourself and some of your technicians, you can get CBD points. We'll certainly give you some, and I know you probably do as well. Need to make sure, as I said, fleas are covered. It's approved in the type of property. There are instances that I've come across where products have been used in a domestic property to wipe out a flea population, but actually on the label it says for agricultural use only. So it's got to be used for the property type. Low toxicity as possible. Formulation is suitable. You might want a growth regulator in there. Microencapsulation is good as well, because that's good for residuality. It will last for longer. So the question that we had before about 2 treatments, is that really enough? And then maybe for using something that's highly residual in terms of longevity, so that microencapsulated chemical that will stay viable for longer, then yeah, possibly it will give you longer control. And again, apply it per label. Speak to your suppliers of the products. They're the ones that are supplying you with these things, manufacturing them, providing them, so they will have all the information you need. And remember, it said labels change, and do a cost assessment. If you're not sure about cost assessments, I think that's on my I did do a risk assessment, said webinar, like I mentioned earlier. I think cost assessments are covered. If not, give me a call or email. All of my contact details are on the website. And always read the label. Like I said, it's the law. I'll say that 14 times a day if I have to. Read the label. It is the law. Okay, so we're coming to the end of it here. I just wanted to do a quick few reminders for anybody that wasn't aware. We've got PPC Live coming up in Yorkshire, of which all the technical team will be available to have a chat on the stand. But also you can register. It's the 11th of March in 2020. Again, you can go to the BPCA website or email events@BPCA. And I'm sure there's probably a prize somewhere if you register. I might be lying at that. Don't rely on that. Don't email saying, where's my prize for registering? Okay, so training exams as well. We've got some bits coming up. Bedbug, I'm going to be doing a webinar in a few weeks on bed bugs. So we're doing a stage 1, stage 2, so 2 webinars, because bedbug control is a really big subject and there's no way we'll be able to cover it in one webinar. So we'll be doing that. But as I said, you can see here there is a bedbug control course as well as a few other bits and pieces. So yeah, best pictures as well. I get quite a few sent through on my phone, pictures of things saying, oh, Natalie, can you ID this? But also sometimes just really interesting pest images that come through. But yeah, if you've got something that you think is interesting or fun or really intricate, and you think that it'd be worth £500 prize, then pop it into us. It will go onto the website, but media, or is it hello? Kat, is it hello BPCA? Hashtag Twitter, there we go. Well, yeah, get in touch with the office if you're not sure, but yeah, worth a go. Certainly I would if I'm not allowed to though. So an Arthur Technical team, this is for a service for BPCA members only, really. I mean, I love pest control. I love talking about it. If someone's got a question, be it a member or not, I'll try and help you. I might be a bit more limited on the time that I will spend with you, of course, but also for BPCA members, I'll come out to a site. That really is only for BPCA members. If you've got a problem site, you want to have a little nose at. I went to a flea one about a year ago up in the north that they were struggling with. They'd have it at about 3 months and they had to move out. It was that bad. So yeah, any problems, be it fleas or anything else, make sure you ask the technical team, email, verbally, but also we can pop out to sites with you. Okay, so we have about 17 minutes. So how many questions have I got here? Yeah, about 12, let's say. Okay, so hopefully he's not dismissed that one. I think that was a mistake. So Christian, how does precautionary sprays work with a letting agent when it's in the tenant's contract to have it sprayed if they have had pets or fleas or not? So I'm going to cover this as it doesn't deserve to be covered quickly, but obviously we've got a few other questions, and if you want to talk about it a bit more, by all means, get in touch. That should not happen. We have phone calls from members of the public, sometimes local authorities, and sometimes members of the BPCA who say exactly that, Christian, that landlords say in their contracts that when you leave, you have to treat for fleas. They cannot do that. they can't do that, trying to influence that. What we are saying is that they can request that monitoring is done. So that's always my advice. If they're saying a treatment needs to be done, they need to be corrected and say, we cannot use an insecticide if we haven't confirmed an infestation. We cannot use it precautionary. Use our code of practice, provide that to them. But what we can do is lay some monitoring devices, do an inspection. If we find anything, of course, we will treat. If we don't, you've had that monitoring period to say, we're fine, you're free of fleas, there are no fleas. So, they just need to approach it differently. So hopefully that's answered your question. Okay, Martin, so 2 treatments work on a light infestation. Yep, as you said, each situation is different. Whether it's 2, it might be 10 treatments if you're unlucky enough. But we know with pests, they don't have one way and that's it. They're not always textbook. We can read as many books as we want, but experience is the only thing that's going to teach you what how many visits you need for something or what approach you should take. We've all had different experiences, so depending on that, it will influence our approach. But yeah, so if it's light infestation, 2 treatments, nothing wrong with that. Do dog and cat fleas look the same? So they can only be established under a microscope. And how you do it, can I go back to my first slide? Can you get me back to my first slide, Kat? Just while I think I might have assistants help me get back to my first slide, the big picture of the flea. Let's have a look. I think it would be quite useful. I was going to cover this, but didn't want to. But with the cat flea, you'll see on its head, it has a very pronounced, let me just go back, hang on a minute. There we go, I'll do it this way. I'll do it the real technical way. Hang on, oh, there it is. Actually, no, the better picture is this one. So hopefully you can all see that. I don't know, let me move my, yeah, here we go. So the cat flea here, you can see its head, how it, the front of it is extended over the proboscis, which is here. That's the thing that they stab us with, if you like, and feed from us. They insert into our skin and feed from, and this sort of shell-like head comes over quite far. Whereas with the dog flea, it's a lot more flat. It's not as, it doesn't protrude out as much. That's the real difference, to be honest. That's anonymous, but yeah, they do look, there's a slight difference, but only by microscope. And to be honest, do we always need to know? Not necessarily. Some occasions, if you're really struggling with infestation, it might be handy because it might be relevant. For instance, I did have a problem with dog fleas in a medical records unit in a hospital, and long story short, it turned out they were leaving a window open, and there was a fox getting in every night and leaving fleas behind, and we couldn't understand why we couldn't get control of the problem with I think it was products we were using at the time. And that was a dog flea, and that kind of told us a bit of a story because we found that it was a dog flea and went, well, hang on a minute, okay, this has got to be this is quite specific. So we're not looking at, there's a cat in the roof, or feral cats, which they were on site at the time, or anything like that. It was a dog flea. So yeah, Fox found it, and that did help a little bit, but it doesn't always matter. Okay, we've got 12 minutes left. So Liz, nice long question here. We have noticed that frontline spot-on treatment seems to be less effective over the last few years. We always advise seeking veterinary advice in conjunction with pest control. Other flea treatments are available from vets. Thank you, Liz. Yes. So yeah, absolutely. I don't use chemicals or Frontline for my pets, but I know a colleague of mine does, and Dee, our technical manager, and she said, yeah, absolutely, Frontline. I think it was bendiacarb before that was actually used, and yeah, resistance. Yeah, very right, very true. Please forgot about that one because I don't use it. But yes, Frontline, there is a lot of resistance to it, but they have changed, I believe, the active ingredient, imidacloprid, I think, possibly. But yeah, there was some resistance because it's used as a precautionary treatment on pets, which still blows my mind why they do this. It doesn't sit well with me, but yes, it's a regular thing. Every 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, you have to treat your animals. Of course, the fleas are gonna get used to it. But yeah, no, very true, Liz. Thank you for bringing that up. Rafi, so is adult insecticide treatment also control larvae? If the rug will be sprayed with pyrethroid. So it can. So the eggs won't be penetrated by, as we know, the insecticide. The larvae, yes, they will be affected by it. The larvicides, obviously, when we're more talking about BTI for mosquitoes and the use of that. But certainly the insecticide will affect the larvae. It will hinder the development. It doesn't penetrate the same because they don't have the same structure as the adult, and it will affect them, but it's not quite a larvicide. So yeah, it's the adults that it is focusing on predominantly with the insecticide. Would you use different insecticides if you carry out 2 treatments? Yes, always, absolutely. Any insect, yeah, 100%. That's all I can really say to that, Matthew. You know, whichever one it is, but yeah, different. So carbamate, pyrethroid, you know, diatomaceous earth. You know, use something different. Always recommend that of any insect. Is a reaction not a? It's a reaction, not a bite. People. So sorry, Martin, I can't get that question. Cathal, so what are the health risks associated with flea bites? So there's a few. So the human flea was most associated with, I think, the plague back then. The cat flea. Now it does have a bacteria that can resemble Lyme's disease in some ways, the one that the ticks produce, but it's really under research and there's not much there, and though it can happen. I wouldn't go around saying to customers, you know, we might get Lyme's disease from these fleas. They have all the tools to, it's a bit like bed bugs, they have all the tools to be able to transfer diseases and that bacteria, but there's just no evidence that it does happen. You know, they could, like worms, sometimes with worms from animal to animal, they can cause a few issues, but certainly to humans, other than the severe reactions that some people have, which obviously is a problem in itself. There aren't any really high on the list diseases or bacteria that they will transfer, but there is a small mention about Lyme's disease, and it's not it directly. I'm not a chemical or a biologist in terms of bacteria and diseases, but yeah, there's an element that's present within a flea that can resemble or morph to create the Lyme disease, but it's so very rare, very rare. So a pet dog or cat must be treated by a vet before treatment in the home is carried out. Yes, always the advice. You know, you've got to treat, obviously make sure your treatment doesn't coincide with that animal being there. That comes risk assessments. As I said, you can have a look at the webinar before, but make sure, you know, you do a risk assessment if there is an animal within the property. It's really important, and that you time that treatment with the treatment of the animal. How common are rodent pets in households with fleas? Rare, if at all. I don't really know many people with rodents as pets. I haven't visited, I don't think I ever, in my 15 years doing technician or supervisory stuff in the field and treatments, I don't think I've ever come across a flea infestation where there were rodents as pets. That's just my experience. Okay, we've got 7 minutes left and about the same amount of questions, so let me see if I can get through them for you. So what is the best way to guide the client if there are cats that are very sensitive to pyrethroid but on label after dying? What is the best way to guide the client if the cats are very sensitive to pyrethroid? Don't use it. Yeah, I would say they need to go down the route of heat treatments or non-toxic, or you can use, there's quite a few, again, I can't go into trade names, but there are products out there that are chemical free and work in a physical way and attack the insect only. And I do believe there are chemicals, oh no, that's a cockroach one, ignore that one. So yeah, there are chemicals, speech a supplier for something that is less toxic. And normally if it's particularly toxic to cats, it will say on the label, like bendiacarb, obviously you don't use around cats. Obviously you want the chemical residual to work, but what about telling the customer when to vacuum after treatment? Should they leave this for a while? Absolutely. So vacuum and clean before the treatment. You do your treatment, and then I would say at least 2 weeks. You need to leave it before they do any cleaning, at least. If you're doing follow-up visits, then obviously longer. But at least 2 weeks, because that's normally the general guide of insecticides on, how long they'll stay residual for. But yeah, if they're vacuuming or mopping, it's going to completely wipe it all away and ruin your treatment. So that's really important, and write that down, because if they do it and your treatment doesn't work, they're going to blame you for an ineffective work. So make sure you write down, do not vacuum or clean. Does the BPCA have a flea treatment document? No, we don't, but we've got the precautionary insecticide code of best practice, which kind of incorporates the approach to flea control. So yeah, David, unfortunately, we don't have a specific document for fleas. So hi, new to the industry. My question is, do pets need to be removed if treating a house? And if so, for how long? Some actives are very harmful for cats. Yeah, so obviously you want to use an active ingredient that is the least harmful. Again, labels, MSDS, speeches, suppliers, but also you remove that cat until that treatment's done. If they can't remove that cat from that house for whatever reason, then you don't use a chemical that might cause them harm. Full stop, really. You need to ask the customer's advice on certain things. Again, using these physical kill pesticides, I want to call them. They're chemical free apparently, but yeah, they won't be as harmful to cats. So yeah, you don't do it if you're not sure. If you're kind of not sure if this is going to be a problem for the cat or not, don't use it. Full stop, really. Can discuss more on the telephone or emails if you want to, Chris. Sorry, but yeah, it's that's the quick answer to it. All right, I've got 4 minutes left. So are dog fleas the same as cat fleas in that they cannot lay viable eggs in feeding from a human host? Absolutely. Yep, Matt. Yes. So can we use chemical on the pet directly? Nope, absolutely not. The vets will do that only. The chemicals we use cannot be applied to the pet, please. When an insect bite is administered, when an insect bite administers, an anaesthetic, an anticoagulant, so you don't actually feel it, when the anaesthetic wears off, the redness occurs. This is the reaction. This is how I read it, Yeah, absolutely that, and we all react differently to it, like anything, any allergies, nut allergies. Some people are allergic to nuts, some are not. When you get bitten by an insect, some will react to it really badly. It will swell up, it'll be really itchy. Others won't even notice it. They might even say, "Oh, I don't get bitten by insects." You probably do, just don't notice it. Okay, so do cat fleas bite house mice and Norway rats, and after feeding, can they produce viable eggs? That'll be a no. I would say that's. Do you know what? I'm going to be honest, Valentine. I don't know. I don't usually say that. Just how it is, really. I'm not sure. Do cat fleas? They will bite them, of course. They'll bite any animal that's got blood. Whether they'll produce viable eggs from them, I want to say they will, actually. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I would say I'm going to look at that because I'm interested, but also have a look at some technical documents. I'm not sure. They will definitely bite them, but whether they'll produce viable eggs, not quite sure on that. I have to admit when I don't know, don't I? What is the best way to eliminate fleas in stables? Oh, blimey, Thomas, that's maybe give me a call about that one. That's a thinker. Safety, obviously, is the main thing, and I think I need to know a bit more about that. So natalie@bpca.org.uk, give me an email, and I'll send you over my phone number and we can have a chat. So 3 more questions. Might better squeeze them in. Can cats return to a bendiacarb treated property once dry? Read the label, read the MSDS. But yes, so I did speak to the manufacturers of bendiacarb. I'm sure I still have the email somewhere because I was like, really? And yeah, once it's dry, it's safe. I do have this, but yes, I would say yourself also to get that clarification, give the manufacturers an email or a telephone call and just confirm that. But they did tell me that, and that was only 4 months ago, probably. Can we treat the dog bed? How long after the dog returns? Don't recommend it. Clean it, wash it, high temperature, low temperature, stick it in the freezer, something along those lines. I don't recommend it, but if your product you're using says on the label you can, then fine. Oh, last question. We've got 1 minute left. So what is it in the cat blood that makes the eggs viable? Well, Ewan, I don't know. I don't know that much information about cat blood and the enzymes. But yeah, you've caught me out there. Good question. I don't know. I am not a professor of enzymes and within the blood, but I want to know. I want to know these things. So yeah, what cat blood makes the eggs viable? It's the enzymes. Let's go with that. But yeah, great question. Challenge me on that one. Thank you. So that's it. We're right on 1:30. I'm going to get told off if I speak anymore. So if you do hang on for a minute, you might see that I'm going to struggle to turn this all off. But lovely to have you all. Thank you, 146 of you. And yeah, feedback. Remember, give us some feedback from today. Okay, thank you.